Hello everyone. Before we jump in, make sure to hit like, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. That way, YouTube knows to keep sharing more stories like this with you. Now, let's get started. I grew up in a small town in Ohio. When I say small, I mean it really was the kind of place where everybody knew everybody else. It had fewer people living in it than the size of my mom's graduating class from the city we had moved from. That kind of place. Most folks stayed their whole lives, and if someone new came around, word spread quick. The streets were quiet, the neighborhoods were close-knit, and for a kid like me, age 7 at the time, there was this sense that nothing bad could really happen there. I guess that's why this night stuck with me all these years. Because something about it broke that illusion, even if nobody around me treated it like it mattered. It was winter. Cold enough that the air outside cut against your cheeks when you stepped out, but not the kind of deep snow winter that would bury everything. Just the kind of night where you pulled your hoodie tighter and stayed inside where it was warm. My parents had left earlier that evening to check on my great-grandmother, who lived in this small house my grandparents had built for her on their property down the street. My grandparents were out of town, so it was up to my parents to make sure she was doing okay. They promised they wouldn't be gone long and that when they got back, we'd order pizza. That promise was enough to keep me and my older sibling content. I was 7, my sibling was 14 or 15, and pizza was more than enough of a prize to look forward to. My sibling was grounded at the time. I don't even remember exactly why. Something silly, something arbitrary, the kind of punishment parents hand out just to remind a teenager who's in charge. Both the house phone and their own phone had been locked away in my dad's gun safe, which was almost comical since neither of us knew the combination. That meant no calling anyone, no games on the phone, no texting. But we made do. We had the game console, and that was enough to kill time. We sat upstairs for a while, controllers in hand, swapping between games and laughing at each other's mistakes. Time passed easily when you were young like that, with no real responsibilities pressing down. The house was quiet except for the hum of the game system and the occasional laugh. At first, neither of us thought about how long my parents had been gone. We figured checking on great-grandma would take a little while, and then pizza would follow. But after an hour, then another, our stomachs started growling, and the thought of hot pizza felt less like a promise and more like a distant dream. It was somewhere around the 2-hour mark when it happened. I heard it first, a knock on the front door. It wasn't frantic, not at first, just a steady rapping that cut through the silence of the house. For a 7-year-old, that sound was instantly exciting. I thought pizza. I thought my parents had ordered it on the way or brought it home with them. I dropped the controller and hopped up, running toward the stairs. My sibling trailed behind me, less eager but still curious. They paused to save the game, the way older kids always did, more careful than I was about such things. The front door had this big window in it, one of those with a clear panel that gave you a full view of whoever was outside. I ran up expecting to see my mom or dad, maybe a pizza box in their hands. But when I looked through the glass, my excitement turned to something else entirely. Standing there was a man I had never seen before. He was tall, lean, with short black hair and scruffy facial hair. He looked like he was in his mid-20s, maybe a little older, but still young. His clothes were plain, nothing remarkable, but it wasn't what he wore that struck me. It was that he was a complete stranger. In a town where everyone knew everyone, seeing a face I didn't recognize standing at our door was strange enough to stop me cold. I froze, staring. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't holding anything in his hands. He was just there, watching through the glass. For a kid that young, the unease was instant. Something inside me knew this wasn't right. I lifted my finger the way kids do, signaling 1 second, and pulled the curtain shut. That motion felt instinctive, almost like hiding, even though I hadn't thought it through. I turned around, and my sibling was there. They had seen him too. The look on their face told me I wasn't overreacting. Their eyes were wide, locked on the door, their mouths slightly open like they couldn't believe what they were seeing. The knock came again, only harder. Then again, faster. In seconds, knocking turned to pounding. The door shook against the frame, and the doorknob rattled like someone was trying to force it open. The sound filled the whole house. My stomach dropped. Fear surged through me in a way I'd never felt before. I was just a kid, but I knew enough to know this wasn't how things were supposed to go. My sibling didn't waste time. They grabbed my hand hard, tugging me away from the front door. Their face was set, jaw tight, eyes darting around as though they were already thinking about what to do next. They pulled me into the kitchen. I remember the light in there was harsh compared to the dim hallway, bouncing off the counters and the sink. They yanked open a drawer and grabbed a knife, one of those standard kitchen knives with a black handle. I can still picture the way their hand shook as they gripped it, the way their knuckles went white. The knife broke in their hand, the handle cracked, maybe it had already been loose or worn, I don't know. But I remember the snap and the startled look on their face. Without hesitation, they tossed it aside and grabbed another one, this one holding together better. The pounding on the door hadn't stopped. It rattled the whole frame, echoed off the walls. I could hear the sound of metal scraping against metal when the knob twisted and jerked. It felt like the man was going to come straight through. My heart hammered so loud I could barely hear. My sibling yanked me into the laundry room, the small, cramped space off the kitchen, and pulled me down with them into the corner. We curled together, their arm tight around me, the knife clutched in their free hand. I buried my face against their shirt, and all I could do was listen. The banging went on. Every hit against the door sent a shiver through me. My siblings' breathing was fast, almost ragged, but they stayed still, waiting ready. It felt like forever, though later I would realize it had been maybe 5 minutes. 5 minutes that stretched into hours when you're crouched on the floor thinking someone is about to break into your house. Then silence. For a moment, the absence of sound was worse. I held my breath, straining to listen. Then, the sound of the door opening. The front door. The hinges creaked. My sibling tensed, their whole body going rigid. I could feel it through their arm. They shifted slightly, knife in hand, prepared to spring up. This was it. The man had gotten in. But when the footsteps came around the corner, it wasn't him. It was my mom. She stood there holding 2 pizza boxes, her expression shifting from normal to confusion as she saw us crumpled together on the floor, both of us shaking and crying. Behind her, the smell of pizza drifted in, almost cruel against the terror still clinging to me. My sibling jumped up, still gripping the knife, and then dropped it, rushing toward her. I stumbled after, sobbing out words I can't even remember clearly. We both tried to explain, tripping over each other, about the man at the door, the pounding, the knob rattling, the way it felt like he was trying to get in. But my mom's reaction wasn't what I expected. She laughed, at least at first. Not in a mean way, more like she thought we were being dramatic kids. My dad was outside, she said. He was talking to the man right now. The man was a mechanic, apparently, asking about a broken-down car that had been sitting in our driveway for a while. He thought maybe we'd be interested in selling it. My mom said the guy felt bad for scaring us once she explained. She hugged us, promised the phones wouldn't be locked up like that again when they were gone, and we sat down to eat pizza. The rest of the night was spent with choked sobs between bites, trying to push away the fear. My parents acted like it was nothing, just a misunderstanding, the kind of thing adults brush off. But here's the part that stuck with me, the part that only really hit years later, looking back as an adult. Why would a grown man, a complete stranger in a town where strangers stood out like neon signs, pound on a door like that? Why rattle the handle, shake it, like he was trying to get in, when all he supposedly wanted was to ask about a car? Why at 9 or 10 at night, in the dark, when no one had put a for sale sign on the car, no ad in the paper, no indication it was up for grabs? Why would he act like that when the first thing he saw was a little kid holding up a finger like, wait here? What adult sees that and responds by trying harder to force their way in? The older I got, the more it sank in. At 7, all I knew was fear. At 15, I might have brushed it off like my parents did. But as an adult, it's clear, that wasn't normal behavior. That wasn't just someone curious about a car. That was someone trying to get inside a house where kids were alone. And if my parents hadn't come home right then, if the door hadn't opened to my mom holding pizza, I don't want to imagine what would have happened. That night has stayed with me ever since. The fear, the knife in my sibling's shaking hand, the sound of the doorknob rattling like it would break off, the silence before the door creaked open. And the way my parents brushed it off, not realizing that for me and my sibling, those few minutes felt like we were staring into something we weren't supposed to survive. I think we were in real danger that night. And I think, even though nothing happened in the end, the only reason it didn't was pure luck. I still remember the day as clear as if it happened yesterday. I was just a kid back then, maybe 11 or 12, still at that age where I thought I was grown enough to make my own decisions, but still young enough to be scared of being left alone. That day was the funeral of a close family friend, someone my parents cared about a lot, but I wanted nothing to do with it. The idea of sitting in a church, dressed in stiff clothes, listening to people cry, watching a casket get lowered into the ground, it all made my skin crawl. I wasn't mature enough to understand death the way adults did. All I knew was I didn't want to be anywhere near it. When I told my parents I didn't want to go, they were pissed. They argued with me, said it was disrespectful, said I was being selfish, but I wouldn't budge. In the end, they gave up, probably too tired to fight with me anymore since they had to leave soon. My dad's face was red as he told me to lock the doors, stay inside, and not do anything stupid. Then they were gone, leaving me alone in the quiet house. The first thing I did was fire up the Xbox. I remember the way the GTA 4 disc sounded when it started spinning, the little whirring noise as the screen loaded up, and the familiar menu music hitting my ears. I sat on the floor cross-legged, controller in hand, completely absorbed. The world in that game felt so much bigger than the one I was sitting in. Driving stolen cars, running from cops, the city lights and sirens, it was the perfect distraction. Time passed easily. I had no sense of how long I'd been playing until I heard it. A knock at the front door. It wasn't loud, just a simple knock, like someone politely tapping to get my attention. I froze for a second, wondering if maybe my parents forgot something and came back. But they had the garage opener, and I didn't hear the car. After a moment, I set the controller down and got up. The hallway seemed darker than usual, like the house had shifted in mood the moment I heard the knock. I walked over, unlocked the deadbolt, and pulled open the door. Nothing. Just the porch, empty and still, the yard stretching out in dull winter light. The street was quiet, no cars, no people. I leaned forward a little, checked the steps, even peeked toward the driveway. Nothing at all. I frowned, shut the door, and went back to the TV. Probably just a random kid in the neighborhood pulling a prank, I thought. My mind went back to GTA, and the knocking disappeared from my head. About 20 minutes later, it came again. Louder this time. Harder. Not polite anymore, but desperate. 3 sharp knocks that rattled the wood just enough to make me jump. My heart skipped. I turned my head toward the door and just sat there, controller still in my hands, staring at the hallway. Something about the sound made my skin prickle. I got up again, more cautious this time. My socks made no sound against the floor as I moved toward the door. I didn't open it right away. I leaned against the wall and looked through the window beside it, pulling the curtain back slowly. Nothing. No shadow, no figure, not even a kid running away laughing. The porch was empty again. Curiosity won out over fear, so I opened the door just to double-check. The cold air hit me in the face as I stepped onto the porch, my eyes sweeping across the yard. That's when I saw it. Across the yard, on the other side of the chain-link fence, was a dog. A German shepherd, pitch black, sitting perfectly still, just staring at me. Its body was stiff, ears up, eyes locked. The kind of stare that pins you in place. For a second, I didn't know what to think. It tripped me out, sure, but it didn't exactly scare me. I liked dogs. My first thought was maybe it belonged to someone nearby and just wandered into the yard. But the way it sat there, not moving an inch, made me uneasy. It didn't look playful. It didn't look lost. It just looked intent. I stared back for a moment longer, then shrugged it off. Weird, but not terrifying. I closed the door, locked it, and went back to GTA. 10 minutes later, everything changed. The sound came like an explosion. Banging. Not knocking, violent, angry banging against the door. The wood shuddered with every impact. It wasn't just fists this time. It sounded like kicking too, the thud of a heavy boot slamming against the panels. My whole body jolted as the sound echoed down the hallway. The controller slipped from my hands and hit the carpet. My chest tightened. Whoever was out there wasn't playing around anymore. I ran down the hall and into my parents' bedroom, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. My dad kept his gun in a drawer by the bed, and I knew exactly where it was. My hands were shaking as I opened it and pulled out the heavy revolver. I had never held it before, only seen my dad clean it or put it away. The cold metal felt wrong in my sweaty palms, but I clutched it like it was my only lifeline. I moved back toward the living room, every creak of the floorboards making me twitch. The banging had stopped, but the silence after it was almost worse. I crept up to the window again, pulling the curtain just enough to see outside. My stomach dropped. The German shepherd wasn't behind the fence anymore. It was on my side of it now, standing right in front of the door, still staring. Its head was tilted slightly down, eyes fixed on the wood as if it knew exactly where I was. I froze, the gun heavy in my hand, my breath caught in my throat. I couldn't make sense of it. How did it get over the fence? There was no sound of it jumping, no clatter of metal. It was just there now, as if it had always belonged to that spot. I stayed pressed against the wall, watching through the narrow slit of curtain, my body stiff as stone. Minutes ticked by, though it felt like hours. The dog didn't move, didn't bark, didn't do anything but stare at the door. I was terrified it would lunge, start clawing, maybe break through somehow. Every noise in the house, every creak, every hum of the fridge, felt like it was amplified, feeding my panic. Eventually, headlights washed over the street, and I heard the familiar sound of my parents' car pulling into the driveway. Relief rushed through me so strong I almost dropped the gun. By the time they came inside, the dog was gone, vanished as quietly as it had appeared. I never told them the full story that night. I just said someone had been knocking, and it freaked me out. My dad gave me a look, annoyed but not really surprised, and my mom told me I shouldn't have stayed home in the first place. But the truth stuck with me. I couldn't shake the image of that black dog, the sound of the pounding on the door, the way the house felt like it was closing in on me. After that day, I never stayed home alone again. Anytime my parents went somewhere, I made sure I was with them, or at least with a friend. The fear had burrowed deep inside me, and I carried it for years. It wasn't until I was grown years later that I brought it up again. I told my dad the whole story, expecting him to be shocked or maybe sympathetic. Instead, he started laughing. Not just a chuckle, full cackling, like it was the funniest thing he'd ever heard. That laugh burned in my ears as I stared at him, confused and angry. He wiped his eyes and finally explained. He had told one of his buddies to mess with me that day. His friend was the one knocking, pounding on the door, trying to scare me. He even brought his dog along, a big black German shepherd, to sell the act. They thought it would be a harmless prank, a way to teach me a lesson for being too stubborn about the funeral. I sat there, stunned, the memory of that fear flashing back fresh as ever. All those years, I thought something unexplainable had happened, that maybe there had been someone outside trying to break in, or some strange dog that appeared out of nowhere. Instead, it was just my dad's idea of a joke. At first, I was pissed. That fear had stuck with me for years, shaping the way I saw being home alone, making me jump at little noises in the dark. But as my dad kept laughing, I realized he had no idea how deep it had cut. To him, it was just a story, a prank he thought I'd laugh about too once enough time had passed. I never really laughed about it, though. Even now, thinking back, I can still feel the weight of that gun in my hands, the thudding at the door shaking through the house, the burning stare of that black dog. It may have been a prank to them, but to me it was real, and it left a mark I'll never forget. That day changed me. It taught me how fragile a sense of safety really is, how quickly your home, the place you're supposed to feel the most secure, can turn into something that feels hostile, alive against you. And even though I know the truth now, that it was just my dad and his friend, the memory of that fear has never gone away. And maybe that's the part that bothers me the most. The prank ended for them that night. For me, it never really did. I never thought a quiet morning on the porch could turn into something I'd never be able to forget. I had gotten into a habit of waking up early, brewing a pot of coffee, and sitting out back with it, letting the cool air and stillness of the countryside settle me before the day began. It was my version of church, my time to think, and it made the solitude of living alone feel peaceful instead of lonely. That morning wasn't supposed to be any different. The sun had barely lifted over the tree line, the grass was still wet with dew, and steam curled off the mug in my hands as I leaned back in the chair, listening to the soft stir of birds waking up. It was calm, almost perfect, but calm can turn in an instant. I noticed movement out of the corner of my eye, something in the trees past the yard. At first I thought it was a deer, maybe one of the big ones I sometimes caught wandering through, but as my eyes focused I realized this wasn't an animal. A man stepped out from the tree line, slow at first, and the sight of him immediately put me on edge. He was big, broad-shouldered, dirty, clothes torn in places, beard wild and unkempt like he hadn't seen a razor or a shower in months. His face was sunken in places, but his eyes were sharp, fixed on me. For a moment he just stood there, maybe 50 yards out, staring, and I stared right back, trying to piece together what I was even looking at. I didn't recognize him, and where I live, you tend to know every neighbor within a couple of miles. Then, just as quick, he bolted. His feet slammed the ground, and he sprinted straight toward me and the house. I froze for half a second, heart hammering in my chest, the mug of coffee sloshing as I jumped to my feet. There was no hesitation in his movement. He was coming for me. I dropped the mug, didn't even think about it, and bolted through the back door, slamming it shut and locking it. My pulse was in my ears. I rushed through the house, securing every door, every window I passed, not even stopping to breathe. By the time I reached the front door and slid the deadbolt, I could hear the pounding of footsteps in the yard. He had made it to the house. My phone was already in my hand, and I punched in 911 with shaking fingers, pressing it to my ear as I backed toward the living room. The dispatcher answered calm, asking what the emergency was, and words tumbled out of me, jumbled but clear enough. Man in my yard, charging at the house. I live alone. I don't know him. She told me to stay calm, that help was on the way, to keep the doors locked. I could hear the reassurance in her tone, but it didn't settle me. Something in me said this wasn't just a trespasser. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you hear every tick of the clock on the wall. I held my breath, straining to pick up any sound outside, but nothing came. I thought maybe he'd run off, maybe he realized I was calling for help. But then I heard it, floorboards creaking. Not outside, inside. The kind of sound that only comes from weight pressing down on old wood. My stomach dropped. I knew my house. I knew the way the boards gave under certain steps. That sound wasn't from me. It wasn't from any draft. Someone was inside. I told the dispatcher in a low voice that I thought he was in the house, and I could hear her typing, asking me to stay on the line, telling me officers were already en route. My hand reached for the shotgun I kept in a cabinet just off the hall, the one I had specifically for home defense. I loaded it fast, hands trembling. I keep it staged with a few different rounds, first a rock salt shell, then a rubber slug, then real ones. My thinking had always been, if I had to use it, I wanted every chance to scare someone off before ending up with something irreversible. That thinking was about to be tested. The creaking grew louder, and I realized the sound wasn't random. It was coming from the basement stairs. I hadn't even considered that possibility, but it hit me like a punch. He'd been inside already. That was the only explanation. The basement windows had always worried me. They were old, not reinforced the way I wanted, but I never thought someone would actually crawl through. The dispatcher kept asking questions, her voice filling my ear, but all I could think was that there had been a stranger sleeping under my house, and now he was climbing the stairs to me. I braced myself, shotgun raised, every muscle tensed. I could see the basement door slowly push open, a shadow stretching long across the hallway floor. Then he stepped out, just as massive up close as he had looked from a distance, eyes wild and fixed right on me. His clothes were filthy, his face smeared with dirt, and he was breathing heavy, like he'd been waiting for this moment. He didn't hesitate. He started walking toward me with purpose, muttering something under his breath I couldn't make out. My voice cracked as I shouted at him to stop, to not take another step, but it was like I didn't even exist to him. His eyes were locked on me, like I was nothing but prey. I pulled the trigger. The blast of the rock salt echoed through the house, filling the hall with smoke and sting. He jerked slightly but didn't stop. I had expected him to stumble, to turn, to feel it enough to back off, but he didn't even blink. He kept coming. My hands tightened, sweat dripping down my temple, and I fired again. The rubber bullet thumped into his chest, the force enough to knock him back a step, but it was like hitting a wall. He didn't slow down. His eyes were wide, his chest heaving, but he just kept moving, one heavy step after another. My mind went blank with panic. I fired the third shot, the live round, and this time it hit. The impact tore through him, and I saw the bloom of red spread across his shirt. He stumbled, but even with that wound, even with a hole in his chest, he didn't stop. He let out a guttural sound, half scream, half growl, and lunged. The weight of him slammed into me, the shotgun flying from my grip as we crashed to the floor. The air left my lungs in a rush, the pain searing as his massive frame pressed me into the floorboards. My hands pushed at him, clawed, but he was strong, impossibly strong even as blood poured from him. It felt endless, those seconds of struggle. His hands gripped at me, trying to pin me, and the smell of sweat, dirt, and blood was overwhelming. I thought I was going to die right there, crushed beneath a madman who should have already been dead. But then his movements slowed. The strength in his arms faltered. His breathing turned ragged, then shallow, then nothing at all. The weight on me shifted, heavier in death than in life, and I realized he was gone. He had died right there on top of me. The phone was still in my hand somehow, the dispatcher's frantic voice calling my name, asking if I was okay, if I was safe. I couldn't answer at first. I couldn't breathe under his weight. It took everything in me to push his body off, to roll him enough that I could crawl free, gasping, shaking. My whole body trembled as I pressed the phone to my ear and croaked out that he was down, that he wasn't moving, that I thought he was dead. I could hear her typing, hear her telling me to stay put, that officers were almost there. I just sat against the wall, staring at the mess in front of me, shotgun out of reach, ears ringing, chest tight. When the cops arrived, lights flashing against the walls, I barely had the strength to stand. They came in with weapons raised, shouting, but froze when they saw the body on the floor and me slumped against the wall. They checked him first, confirmed what I already knew, then pulled me to my feet, guiding me outside where the cool air hit my face like a slap. My hands were still shaking, my clothes damp with sweat. I couldn't even put words together. All I could do was sit on the porch while they moved through the house, securing it, taking pictures, calling in more units. It made the local paper the next day. Man shot after breaking into rural home, possible self-defense. The investigation dragged on for weeks, every detail picked apart, every action I took questioned. But eventually I was cleared. They told me the man had escaped from a mental hospital in Baltimore days earlier, wandered nearly 50 miles before ending up in my woods. He'd broken in the day before, slipping through that basement window, and spent the night down there while I slept above him, unaware. That thought alone kept me up at night more than anything else. That while I had brushed my teeth, made dinner, watched TV, and gone to bed, he had been right under me, breathing the same air, waiting. I don't think anyone who hasn't lived through something like that can really understand what it does to you. Even now, mornings don't feel the same. I still sit on the porch sometimes, but the calm never lasts. Every rustle of leaves, every shadow in the tree line, sets my nerves on edge. I replaced the basement windows, reinforced the doors, bought cameras, but none of it erases the memory of that morning, of the way he came through my house like he belonged there, of the weight of him crushing me as life drained out of him. The story is over, the case closed, but the feeling doesn't leave. It lingers, like the house itself remembers. I know I did what I had to do, but knowing doesn't make it easier. It's not something you shake off. It's something that lives with you, the reminder that sometimes danger doesn't knock at the door. It's already inside, waiting. I remember the night clear as day, even though years have passed. I was only 18 back then, still a kid in a lot of ways, barely scraping by on cheap rent and hand-me-down furniture, living in the bottom half of a duplex with my best friend upstairs. We had a good setup for the time. He had the upper unit, I had the lower, and we used to throw parties that would pack both apartments and spill out into the yard. The kind of nights where music shook the walls, beer cans piled in corners, and random faces came and went like it was some revolving door of college kids, townies, and whoever else wanted in. Back then, it didn't really faze me if I didn't recognize someone in the kitchen or passed out on the couch. It was just the way things went. That night wasn't a party though. It was quiet. My friend was out, and I had the whole bottom unit to myself. I had smoked a little, nothing crazy, just enough to give the night that soft haze, and I was posted up on the couch, controller in hand, locked into a game of Black Ops 2. The TV cast the only real light in the room, washing the walls in that bluish flicker that made the rest of the apartment look even darker than it was. I had the volume just high enough to catch the footsteps in-game, but not so loud I couldn't hear if someone came down the stairs or knocked on my door. The first sound didn't even register as real at first. I thought it was part of the game, a heavy slam, like a door hitting the wall. My head turned toward the kitchen almost automatically, half expecting to see my buddy stumbling in or some random showing up late. It wasn't unusual. People came and went all the time, and I'd stopped questioning it. I paused the game and waited for footsteps. They came, heavy, slow, and purposeful, like whoever it was knew the place and didn't feel the need to sneak. I set the controller down and got up, not worried yet, just curious. I figured maybe someone who had crashed here before was coming back, or maybe it was a drunk friend who got confused and thought the bottom apartment was the top. I stepped toward the kitchen, the sound of my own bare feet against the floor mixing with the steady thud of boots on linoleum. When I rounded the corner, I froze. There he was, a huge man, easily 6'4", built like he worked fields all day or did heavy labor. He wore overalls, the kind you only ever see on older guys in the country or farmers that hadn't changed their style in decades. His shoulders were so broad, he looked like he barely fit through the doorframe. But it wasn't just his size that stopped me cold. It was the knife. a long kitchen knife, clutched in his hand like he was about to carve into something. He wasn't moving fast, not charging or waving it around, just standing there in the kitchen, staring straight at me. My brain tried to make sense of it, to pull some explanation out of the air. Party? No. Wrong apartment? Maybe. But the knife, why the knife? For a second I thought maybe it was a prank. Maybe some drunk idiot thought it'd be funny to scare me. But there was nothing funny in the way this guy looked at me. His eyes weren't wide or wild. They were just blank. Like he wasn't even really seeing me. I didn't say much. I might have managed something like yo or what, but whatever words left my mouth didn't matter because the second they did, instinct took over. I wasn't about to stick around and figure out what this guy wanted or what he thought he was doing in that kitchen with that knife. I bolted. The side door was right there, just a few steps away, and I didn't even think. I grabbed the handle, yanked it open, and shot out into the night. My heart was hammering so hard I thought I was going to pass out right there in the yard. I didn't look back to see if he followed. I didn't care. I just tore around the side of the house and into my own apartment door, slamming it shut and throwing the lock. Then the other lock. Then the chain. Then anything else I could shove in front of it. Inside my place, the air felt thin, like there wasn't enough oxygen. I was pacing, checking windows, flipping locks on doors I hadn't touched in months. Every sound outside made me jump. A car passing, a dog barking in the distance, the faint creak of the duplex settling. I couldn't tell if it was him moving around upstairs or just my imagination running wild. I grabbed my phone, though to this day I can't remember who I called first. Maybe my buddy, maybe 911. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped it, and I remember thinking how stupid it would look if someone found me dead on the floor with my phone smashed from clumsiness. I pressed numbers, heard voices, tried to explain, but nothing felt real. My own voice sounded far away, like I was underwater. Time passed strangely. It felt like hours, but maybe it was only 30 minutes. I sat there, back against the wall, eyes on the ceiling, waiting for footsteps. Waiting for something to crash through my door. But eventually the sounds above me got quieter. Slower. Then nothing. Silence. It was the kind of silence that makes you question if you're actually hearing silence or if your ears are ringing too hard from adrenaline to notice anything else. I couldn't just sit there forever. I had to know if he was gone. Creeping up the stairs felt like walking into a nightmare I didn't want to face. Every step creaked too loud. Every shadow seemed to move when I blinked. My hands were sweaty on the railing, and I kept my weight balanced so if I had to turn and run, I could. The door to the top apartment was cracked. I pushed it open slow, my eyes darting everywhere at once. The kitchen light was still on, buzzing faintly. The smell hit me before I even saw him, cheap booze, sweat, and cigarettes all mixed together. There he was. The hulking man was slumped on the couch, knife nowhere in sight, chest rising and falling in deep, heavy breaths. Passed out cold, his head lolled to the side, mouth open, snoring. The same kind of deep snore you hear from someone who's had way too much to drink and their body just shuts down. Relief washed over me, but it wasn't clean relief. It was messy. I was shaking, my stomach tight, my body telling me to get the hell out even though the danger looked like it was over. I backed out slow, making sure not to wake him. Later, I'd learn the full story. He wasn't some random stranger. He wasn't there for me. He used to live in that apartment. The upstairs one. My friend's place. He'd been on parole for domestic abuse charges, had gotten wasted downtown, and somehow made it back to the place he thought was still his. He'd walked right through the door like it was still home, carrying that knife, and stumbled into my night like some nightmare made real. At 18, barely more than a kid, 5'8" and maybe $140 soaking wet, I had been face to face with a man who could have crushed me without trying. A man who had already proven violent in his past. And the only thing that saved me was the fact that booze won out over whatever else was in his head. I went back downstairs, locked myself in, and stayed up until the sun rose. My eyes never left the doors, the windows, every possible way someone could get in. Even when I finally passed out the next morning, controller still on the couch, TV still glowing, I slept with that sick feeling in my stomach that the world wasn't as safe as I thought it was. That night changed how I looked at everything. It wasn't a ghost story or some horror movie nonsense. It was real. Flesh and blood. A man with a knife who had no business being there. And me, a kid who thought he was just going to spend the night playing Xbox, smoke a little, and crash on the couch. I never forgot the sound of those boots on the kitchen floor. The way he looked at me, blank and heavy, like I wasn't even real. And I never forgot how fast my body decided for me. No hesitation, no bravado, no dumb choices. Just run. It's easy to laugh about it now, in pieces, tell it like some wild story from when I was young and dumb. But when I close my eyes, I can still see him standing there, knife in hand, filling that kitchen doorway like he was carved out of the house itself. And I still thank whatever part of me knew better than to stay that I got to walk away from it. Because I know damn well it could have gone another way. I was living in that split-level duplex with my ex during what I now think of as a very strange, unsettling period of my life. At the time, though, it didn't feel like anything out of the ordinary in the bigger sense. We were just two people trying to make things work, with too many animals crammed into one space and our own personal issues we kept pretending didn't exist. The place itself was nothing special, a plain little duplex in an average neighborhood, half buried into the hillside, so that the lower level sat like a daylight basement, partly underground and partly exposed to the street. It wasn't ugly, it wasn't beautiful. It was just where we lived. We had 4 cats, each with their own personalities, and a foster dog, a black lab mix, who was sweet but nervous. The cats ruled the upstairs like they owned it, but the odd thing was they never, ever went downstairs. Not once. The dog hated the lower level too. He would whine at the top of the stairs if I tried to coax him down, tail tucked, body stiff like he was waiting for something to lunge at him. At first I laughed it off. Animals get weird about things, I thought. Maybe it smelled funny down there, or maybe they didn't like the echo. But it got harder to laugh about the longer I lived there. I had turned the downstairs family room into a combination office and exercise room, and the back room down there was our bedroom. The laundry and bathroom were tucked away behind that. It should have been convenient. It should have made the space feel cozy and useful. Instead, every time I was down there, I felt a weight pressing on me, a prickling at the back of my neck like eyes boring into me. The windows were at street level, so I could always tell myself someone might just be walking by, and I was reacting to shadows or the sense of movement. But even when the blinds were drawn, the feeling didn't leave. I would catch myself glancing over my shoulder every few minutes, scanning the room, my pulse jumping at every small creak or thud from upstairs. The first strange thing that happened, I didn't even think of as anything more than my imagination. It was late, and I was doing laundry, headphones in, music loud enough that I was in my own little bubble. My ex was upstairs, gaming like he always did, completely absorbed in whatever he was playing. As I bent over to shove clothes into the washer, I heard snapping fingers right in my ear. Not muffled, not faint, but sharp, like someone was standing next to me, trying to get my attention. I pulled out my headphones so fast they yanked the cord, heart hammering, but there was no one there. No one anywhere near me. The cats didn't follow me down, the dog wasn't with me, and my ex was still upstairs, oblivious. The sound had been so real that I stood frozen, staring at the empty air, waiting for something else. When nothing happened, I tried to laugh it off. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe the music popped or distorted. Maybe I was just tired and jumpy, because I already didn't like being down there. That's what I told myself, and I went on with laundry. I tried to forget it, but the second time was different. That one stayed with me. That one I can't explain away, no matter how many times I go over it in my head. It was one of those quiet days when the house feels strangely hollow. My ex had taken 2 of the cats and the dog to visit his family in the city. I stayed behind, partly because I didn't feel like tagging along, partly because I wanted a little space to myself. It was early 2000s, before smartphones, and I was at my desk downstairs printing coupons off the computer. The printer hummed and clicked, spitting out flimsy sheets of paper while I leaned back in my chair. Everything was still. The kind of still where you can hear the hum of the fridge upstairs if you really listen. Then I heard it. The unmistakable sound of the front door unlocking, the bolt sliding back. The door opening and shutting. Footsteps on the landing above me, heavy and ordinary, the sound of someone home. My whole body relaxed in that instant. I didn't even doubt it. Who else could it be but my ex, back early with the animals? I called out, casual, expecting the dog to barrel down the hall and the cats to scatter, annoyed by his excitement. I walked toward the stairs, smiling a little, ready to see them all come clattering in. But the landing was empty. The hallway was empty. The door was shut tight, exactly as it had been before. I froze at the bottom step, staring. No shoes, no bags, no jangling leash, no ex standing there waiting for me. The silence pressed down, heavy and wrong. My first thought was that maybe he'd played a trick and slipped back outside, but when I rushed up to the door and pulled it open, the driveway was bare. The street was quiet. No car, no movement. The neighbors' houses were still and empty. It was broad daylight, but I felt my skin crawl as if it were the middle of the night. I stood there for a long time, staring at the empty street, trying to swallow the panic rising in my chest. I checked the lock, checked the windows. Nothing was disturbed. The cats lounged upstairs, perfectly calm, not the least bit concerned. That rattled me more than anything. If someone had come in, even for a second, they would have reacted. But they hadn't. It was just me, and the sound of footsteps that had been so clear, so normal, like any other day. I picked up the phone and called my ex. He answered with the noise of his family in the background, and when I told him what I'd heard, he went quiet. Then he said he was still in the city, nowhere near home. I could hear it in his voice. He was shaken too, even if he tried to keep it level. He promised he would come back right away, and I didn't argue. While I waited, I sat upstairs with the cats, every muscle in my body tense, every creak of the house making me flinch. When he finally got home, I was almost embarrassed by how relieved I felt, how quickly the air seemed to ease when he walked in the door. We talked it over, and neither of us could come up with a good reason for what I'd heard. It wasn't the kind of sound you mistake. It wasn't pipes or a settling house or a trick of imagination. It was the sound of someone entering and walking in, as ordinary as it gets. And yet no one was there. After that, he agreed that if he ever went out of town again, he'd leave the dog with me, since the dog seemed to know something we didn't and would at least make me feel less alone. I never had anything like that happen again. No more snapping fingers, no more phantom doors or footsteps. The rest of the time we lived there was uneventful, if tense in its own domestic ways. But I never shook that feeling of being watched when I went downstairs, never shook the chill that ran through me when I thought about the sound of the lock turning, the door opening, the feet crossing the landing, all of it as clear as if it had really happened. Looking back, I've tried to explain it to myself 100 different ways. Maybe it was stress. Maybe it was my mind playing tricks, tuned too sharply to the things that made me uneasy in that house. Maybe it was the way sound carried, an echo from outside that just happened to sound exactly right. But none of those explanations ever sit comfortably. I've never had auditory hallucinations before or since, never heard anything that real without a source. I know what I heard that day, and I know how it felt, standing at the bottom of the stairs, waiting to see someone who wasn't there. That house has long since faded from my life, but whenever I think back on it, I remember the animals avoiding the lower level, the dog refusing to set paw down there, and the heavy, crawling weight of being watched that never left me when I sat alone in those rooms. It's easy to dismiss things you don't understand, to laugh at yourself for being jumpy, to say the brain is good at filling in gaps. But when I think about the snapping fingers inches from my ear, or the sound of a door and footsteps that never were, I can't laugh it off. I can only accept that sometimes things happen with no neat explanation, and all you can do is remember the way it made you feel and hope it never happens again. I've been a truck driver long enough that the cab of my rig feels more like home than any apartment I've ever rented. People who don't drive trucks for a living probably don't understand that. To them it's just a machine, just a job. But when you're living weeks at a time out on the road, sleeping in that little space behind your seat, eating meals on the dash, staring out the windshield for thousands of miles, it becomes a part of you. Every sound of the engine, every rattle in the dash, every groan when the wind hits the trailer just right, you know it like the creaks of an old house. That's why what happened outside Pocatello sticks with me the way it does. It wasn't the missing $20, it wasn't even the scattered wallet or the cracked door. It was knowing that while I slept, dead to the world in what I thought was my locked, safe little home, some stranger was inches from me, breathing the same air, moving around inside that small space, maybe even watching me for a moment before deciding what he wanted. I can shrug off losing a 20. What I can't shrug off is the thought of being that vulnerable without even knowing it until it was too late. I'd been running hard that week, nothing unusual. West Coast freight, picking up in Oregon, and headed east toward Wyoming with a load of lumber. I'd been tired all day, the kind of tired where even coffee only props you up for a little while. When I rolled into that little gas station outside of Pocatello, I didn't think much of it. I'd stopped there before. It wasn't anything special. 2 diesel pumps, one of those old convenience stores with half the shelves empty, and a couple of slot machines humming against the back wall inside. A handful of trucks parked out front, maybe 5 or 6, not a full lot by any stretch. I fueled up, grabbed a sandwich and a bottle of water inside, and parked on the far side of the lot, away from the pumps. I like having some space. Most drivers do. You get tired of people pulling in next to you, slamming their doors, or letting their reefers cycle all night right by your bunk. I backed in close to the edge of the gravel, nose out so I could roll straight out in the morning. I did my usual routine, locked both doors, checked the windows, drew the curtains. I even gave the passenger door handle a little tug from the inside, just out of habit. Snapped shut, solid. I've always been careful about that. The seatbelt through the handles trick was something I knew, but I hadn't been doing it then. I figured locked doors were enough. It was winter, the kind where the cold settles deep into your bones if you stand out too long. I remember crawling into the bunk with 2 blankets and still feeling the air sting through the cab walls. The truck idled a little rough, rattling me to sleep, and I was out in minutes. I don't remember dreaming. I just remember opening my eyes to the faint gray light of early morning and something not feeling right. At first I thought it was just the cold, like maybe I'd left a vent cracked. Then I noticed the curtain wasn't pulled all the way across the passenger side. Just a couple of inches open, enough that I could see light leaking in. I never leave it like that. I sat up, rubbed my eyes, and that's when I saw the passenger door wasn't shut all the way. It was cracked open, not swinging wide, but just enough to kill the seal. My heart started pounding, and I leaned forward, half thinking maybe I'd been careless the night before. But then I looked down and saw my wallet on the passenger seat. It wasn't where I'd left it. The leather was open, cards scattered around like someone had gone rifling through it in a hurry. Driver's license, fuel cards, a couple of credit cards, all fanned out across the seat and floorboard. I froze there for a few seconds, staring, my mind running through every possibility. I reached forward and started gathering them up. My license was there, my bank cards, everything. I flipped through it once, then again. Nothing missing, except for the 20 I always kept folded in the bill slot. Just $20 gone. That detail almost made it worse. If everything had been stolen, I could chalk it up to a thief doing what thieves do. But the fact that someone went through everything, touched every single card, and only took the cash, it made me feel sick. It made it personal. I sat in the driver's seat for a long minute, door still cracked, engine idling low, just listening to the empty lot around me. A couple of other trucks were still parked, curtains drawn. The store lights glowed, but no one was out walking around. The world was quiet, but I couldn't shake the thought that someone had been inside my cab, right next to me while I slept. I slammed the door shut, locked it again, and this time I looped the seatbelt through both handles the way I should have the night before. The click of the buckle gave me a little comfort, but not much. I started the truck moving, eased out of the lot, and got back on the road. A few miles later, maybe 10 at most, I saw him. A guy walking along the shoulder, heading away from the gas station. Backpack slung low, hood pulled up even though the sun was just coming up, head down against the wind. The kind of drifter you see out here now and then. Clothes layered, beat-up shoes, a little hunched like he'd been walking a long way. As I got closer, I felt my stomach knot. I don't know how, but I knew it was him. The timing, the direction, the whole feel of him. He never looked at me, not once, but as I passed, I could picture his hands flipping through my wallet, the sound of my cab door creaking open, the quiet shuffle of him standing inches from where I slept. I kept rolling. What else could I do? I wasn't about to pull over and confront some stranger on the side of the highway. For $20? No, but that wasn't the point anymore. The point was that he'd been in my space, my home. I thought about what could have happened if he'd wanted more than cash. A knife, a gun, or even just the wrong impulse. I would have never known until it was too late. That thought sat in my chest heavier than the miles ahead of me. By the time I reached the next town, I'd already decided I wasn't reporting it. What would I even say? Some drifter stole $20 while I slept. No witnesses, no cameras, no evidence. It would be nothing more than paperwork to the cops, maybe a laugh about how a trucker got robbed in his sleep. So I let it go, at least on paper. But I never let it go in my head. Even now, years later, I can still see that door cracked open in the gray light of morning. I can still feel that cold rush of realizing someone had been inside my cab. I can still picture the cards scattered like breadcrumbs across the seat. These days, I never skip the seatbelt trick. Both doors every night. I double-check them before I crawl into the bunk. I don't park at that gas station anymore either. Not that it matters much. What matters is that I learned the hard way that even out here, where the world feels empty and quiet, you're never really alone. The $20 was gone, but that wasn't the real cost. The real cost was the piece of peace I lost, the kind of peace you need to survive weeks on the road. Now, every time I close my eyes in the bunk, I think about how easy it was for someone to be inches away from me without me knowing. That's what still haunts me. And that's why I always say, lock your doors, run the belt through the handles, and never fool yourself into thinking the truck is unbreakable. It's your home, yeah, but it's only as safe as you make it. I learned that outside Pocatello, and I've carried it with me ever since. I was in my mid-20s when I lived in that little rental house with my friend. It was a modest place, nothing fancy, just 2 bedrooms, a bathroom, a small living room, and a kitchen that always seemed a little too cramped when we were both in it at the same time. We weren't living large by any means, but it was cheap, and for the stage of life we were both in, that was enough. My friend worked nights. He had this steady job at a warehouse, and he'd usually leave around 7 in the evening and not get back until morning, sometimes as late as 9 or 10. That left me with the house to myself most nights, which I enjoyed. I worked days, came home in the evenings, and the house was quiet. It worked out perfectly, or at least it seemed like it did at the time. Like most guys my age, I had my routines. One of those routines was watching porn when I knew I'd be completely alone. I wasn't ashamed of it, but the last thing I wanted was for someone to walk in on me, especially my roommate. So I timed it carefully. I always waited until he had left for work, and I was sure he was gone for the night. Only then would I relax, maybe grab a drink, close my door, and let the volume go up just enough to feel comfortable. That night started like any other. I remember it was in the fall, late October or early November. The air outside had that crisp chill to it, and we'd already had a few nights where the temperature dipped close to freezing. I'd gotten home from work, thrown something easy in the microwave, and eaten on the couch while scrolling through my phone. My friend came home for just a few minutes before his shift. He did that sometimes, just to grab something or change clothes. I remember hearing him moving around, his heavy boots clunking across the floor. Then, like always, he left. I heard the door shut, and the sound of his truck starting up in the driveway. A few seconds later, it rumbled off down the street until the noise faded. Once I was sure he was gone, I settled into my room. I had this old desk chair that squeaked whenever I leaned back, and the glow of my laptop was the only light in the room. The blinds were closed, the house was quiet, and I felt comfortable enough to open up Pornhub. I had the sound up, not blasting, but loud enough that I didn't feel like I had to strain to hear it. I don't know how long I'd been watching when it happened. Maybe 10 minutes, maybe less. I was distracted, caught up in what I was doing, when I heard something that froze me in place. It was a voice, a female voice, clear as day. Just outside my bedroom door, soft but direct, I heard, "Hello." At first, I thought I had imagined it. The video I was watching didn't have any dialogue like that. It wasn't the audio, and it was so distinct, so close, that it couldn't have been anything else. Someone was outside my door. My first thought, embarrassingly enough, was that it was my friend's girlfriend. She came over sometimes, though not often. If she had stopped by unexpectedly and heard me in there, the idea of her catching me in the middle of what I was doing made my stomach drop. My ears burned. I scrambled to shut the video off, my hands fumbling with the mouse. The sudden silence in the room felt like a spotlight on me. I sat there for a second, listening. Nothing. No footsteps, no movement, no sound at all. Just the hum of my laptop fan. I told myself I had to deal with it. If it was her, the only thing worse than her hearing me would be me hiding in the room afterward, like some guilty teenager. I took a breath, got up from my chair, and opened the door. The hallway was empty. The living room light was off, and the house was still. I walked through the living room, into the kitchen, and checked the front door. Locked. No one was there. I went back to the bedrooms and peeked into my roommate's room, just to make sure. Empty. The whole house was empty. I stood there for a while, confused. I knew what I had heard. It wasn't faint, it wasn't something I could write off as the house settling, and it wasn't the video. It had been right outside my door, like someone standing there and calling in. A simple, hello, but it was enough to make the hair on my neck stand straight up. I thought about the timing. If it really had been my roommate's girlfriend, she would have had to slip out the front door in the 15 seconds it took me to shut the video down and get into the hallway. That wasn't enough time. The house wasn't big. Even if she had sprinted out, I would have heard the door open and slam shut. But I hadn't heard anything. The house had been silent. I checked the back door, too, just to be sure. Still locked. Windows closed. Nothing out of place. It made no sense. For the rest of the night, I couldn't relax. I sat in the living room with the TV on low, not even watching, just listening to the background noise because the silence felt unbearable. Every creak of the house made me flinch. I kept replaying it in my head, that single word, that female voice, as clear as if someone had leaned right into the crack of my door and said it. Eventually, exhaustion won out. I went back to my room, shut the door, and got into bed. I didn't turn the video back on, obviously. I just laid there in the dark, staring at the ceiling. The longer I thought about it, the more uneasy I felt. I'd rather have believed it was a ghost than think about the other possibilities. Because the other possibilities all meant something far worse, that someone had actually been in the house. The next morning, my roommate came home from work like usual. I didn't tell him what had happened. Part of me was embarrassed, and another part didn't even know how to explain it without sounding paranoid. Hey, I was watching porn last night, and I heard someone say hello at my door. That wasn't a conversation I wanted to have, so I kept it to myself. But I couldn't shake it. I started noticing little things. The back gate to the yard, for example. I'd find it unlatched sometimes, swinging slightly in the wind, even though we never used it. Once, I came home and found the kitchen window unlocked. Another time, I woke up to what I swore was the sound of someone moving in the living room, only to find nothing there. I never caught anyone, never saw anyone, but the unease lingered. Looking back, I don't know what was worse, the thought that I might have imagined the whole thing, or the thought that I hadn't. Because if I hadn't, it meant that at some point, while I was in that room with my door closed, there had been someone else in the house with me. Close enough to stand right outside my door and speak. Close enough to know I was distracted. And the fact that they hadn't taken anything, hadn't made themselves known, hadn't done anything except say one word, that was the part that stuck with me the most. Whoever it was, they hadn't wanted to be seen. They had wanted me to know they were there. I moved out of that house a few months later. My friend ended up getting a place with his girlfriend, and I found another apartment across town. I never told him about that night. I don't know if he would have believed me. Maybe he would have laughed it off, said I was tired and imagined it. But I know what I heard. Sometimes, even now, when I'm alone in my room with the door shut, I'll catch myself glancing at it, half expecting to hear that same soft, almost casual hello on the other side. And the worst part is knowing that if I do hear it again, it won't be a ghost. It'll be someone who was close enough to touch the handle, standing there in the quiet, waiting. I was 12 years old the first time I truly understood how terrifying it could feel to be alone inside your own house. It was the middle of the 1980s, back when kids were left home alone more often, back when you couldn't just text your parents or track someone on a phone. It was a different time, but fear still felt the same way then as it does now. That night, my parents had gone out. They didn't leave often, but when they did, they always gave me the same routine. Lock the doors, don't answer the doorbell, don't touch the stove. It was nothing new. I wasn't scared of being alone back then. I was 12. I thought I was getting old enough to handle myself. Besides, we lived in a quiet neighborhood, the kind of place where people knew each other's names, where kids rode bikes until dark. It wasn't supposed to be the kind of place where anything bad happened. The night started out normal. I stayed up watching TV longer than I probably should have. The house had that dim, comfortable quiet that only happened when it was just me. My parents' voices weren't in the background. No clinking of dishes, no radio in the kitchen. Just the TV, the hum of the old refrigerator, and the occasional car driving by outside. Eventually, I went to bed. I was the kind of kid who needed to leave the hallway light on. Not because I believed in ghosts or monsters, but because darkness always made every sound feel sharper. The creaks of the house were normal in the day, but in the dark, they felt like something else. Still, I wasn't scared that night. I remember pulling the covers up, staring at the glow of the light from the hallway spilling across my floor and drifting off. What woke me up was the phone. The ring of an old phone is something you don't forget. It was sharp, loud, and it cut through everything, especially in the middle of the night. My eyes flew open, and for a second, I just lay there listening to it echo through the house. I didn't want to get up. I thought about just letting it ring, but after a few more shrill bursts, I swung my legs out of bed and padded down the hallway. The phone was mounted on the wall in the kitchen, with the long curly cord dangling. I lifted it without even thinking. What I heard on the other end wasn't what I expected. The voice wasn't one I recognized. It wasn't a wrong number, either. It was someone saying things, nasty things. Words I wasn't supposed to hear, things I didn't even fully understand but knew were bad. They were saying what they wanted to do to me, and the tone wasn't joking, not in the way kids teased each other on the playground. It was low and deliberate. I froze, gripping the phone so tightly the plastic pressed into my hand. My chest felt hot and tight. For a second, I didn't even know what to do. Then instinct kicked in. I slammed the phone back onto the receiver, so hard it clattered against the wall. The kitchen was dead silent again, except for my own breathing. I just stood there, staring at the phone like it might ring again, like the person could somehow still be on the other end, listening. My skin felt prickly, like every part of me was alert at once. I tried to tell myself it was just a prank. That's all it was. People made prank calls all the time. But the words they had said, the tone, there had been nothing funny about it. I didn't want to stand in the kitchen anymore. I walked back to my room faster than I meant to, almost jogging down the hallway, trying not to look at the windows. I shut my bedroom door and sat on my bed listening. The house felt different now. Every creak of the walls settling, every gust of wind outside, it all felt sharper, heavier. I sat there for a long time, trying to calm down. Then came the knock. It wasn't at the front door. It wasn't on the back door either. It was on my window. My bedroom window. The sound was small but clear, knuckles tapping against the glass just a few feet from where I was sitting. My whole body went cold. I didn't move at first. I just stared at the curtains that hung over the window. The knock came again, louder this time, impatient. I wanted to scream, but my throat wouldn't work. Finally, I forced myself to pull the curtain back just an inch. And there he was, the boy from my neighborhood. The one who followed me around, even though I told him I didn't like him. The one who never seemed to take no for an answer. His face was right there, lit faintly by the streetlight down the road. He was grinning, his hand pressed against the glass. I jumped back so fast I nearly tripped over the edge of my bed. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. For a second, I didn't know what to do. I couldn't understand why he was there, why he was knocking on my window in the middle of the night. The phone call flashed in my head, and suddenly I couldn't tell if it had been him, if he had been the one saying those things, if he had planned this. I pressed myself against the wall, breathing shallow, trying to be quiet. I didn't pull the curtain back again. I couldn't look. The knocking came once more, softer this time, almost playful, like he thought it was funny. I stayed frozen, every muscle in my body screaming not to move. After a while, it could have been minutes, it could have been longer, the sound stopped. I didn't hear anything else outside. No footsteps, no voice. Just silence. But that silence was worse, because I didn't know if he was still there, standing in the dark just beyond the glass. I sat like that until I heard the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. Headlights swept across the walls of my room, and I finally let out the breath I'd been holding. My parents were home. I ran out of my room the second I heard the front door open. I don't think I've ever been so relieved to hear their voices filling the house again. The tension in my chest broke, and I felt tears sting my eyes even though I didn't want them to see me cry. That night burned itself into me. The phone call, the knock at the window, the face grinning at me through the glass. I never told my parents the full truth. I didn't want to get in trouble, and I didn't even know how to explain it. But I never forgot it. From that night on, I locked my window every single time I was in that room. Even in the middle of summer, when the air was hot and still, I kept it shut tight. I never wanted to feel that exposed again, never wanted to sit in the dark wondering who was on the other side of the glass. It was the first time I learned that being home alone didn't just mean having the house to yourself. It also meant being vulnerable in ways I hadn't thought about before. And no matter how much time has passed, I can still hear that knock on the glass if I think about it long enough.